Alright, so I got some pretty major updates here for you guys that honestly have been dramatically overlooked in the mainstream media, and that is the fact that millions and millions of Americans are set to immediately be affected by rollbacks in some of the expansionary policies that were implemented during COVID, such as programs like Medicaid. So here from Common Dreams, Jake Johnson, he gives us some of the details, saying that 15 million people could lose coverage as nightmarish Medicaid purge begins. Okay, so he starts off saying, beginning on Saturday, states across the U.S. will start the process of stripping Medicaid coverage from millions of people as pandemic-era related protections are lapsing, which is part of a broader unraveling of the safety net that was built to help families withstand the public health crisis and resulting economic turmoil. So this is something I've talked about on this channel extensively before. Of course, we know about the examples such as the child tax credit, which was passed in the early parts of COVID, essentially lifted millions and millions of children across the United States out of abject poverty, and then basically we got to the point where they were set to have to renew it within Congress, and you had motherfuckers like within the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party like Joe Manchin, who were essentially coming out and making arguments that, oh, these parents aren't spending this money on their children or any basic life necessities, they're going to go out and they're going to spend it on drugs, just entirely made up bullshit, and then they let it lapse, and then what do you know? You see over the next couple of months, millions and millions of children fall back into poverty. Okay, so this is what happened during COVID. Of course, there were billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that were dumped into the pockets of corporate America to prop them up during that economic turmoil. There was crumbs that was given to average working class people, and then those crumbs were quickly stripped away by our government as they feel the need to impose more and more austerity measures on people who are in the bottom rung of the ladder in this country. But they continue saying that Medicaid's continuous coverage requirements were enacted in the early in the COVID-19 pandemic to help vulnerable people maintain insurance amid the health emergency, resulting in record high Medicaid enrollment. Okay, so let's just take a pause on that for just a second here and just realize that like our government's solution during the middle of a global pandemic, which was unprecedented in nearly a century, the solution wasn't to extend universal healthcare to every single American to make sure that they were taken care of during the COVID pandemic, but was instead to like slightly expand some of these programs that were implemented under the Obama administration, which were largely just handouts to the wealthiest multi-billion-dollar health insurance companies in the entire world, instead of just providing that universal coverage, or hell, even doing the public option, which is something that Joe Biden explicitly ran on and hasn't mentioned a single goddamn time since he has been elected. I mean, this is what our government does. During an unprecedented health emergency in this country, we did not even have conversations about implementing universal healthcare coverage, but now even the measly crumbs that they did extend in the form of some of these healthcare protections to people are now being stripped away. So they say at the end of last year, congressional negotiators agreed on a bipartisan basis to set April 1st, that's 2 days ago now, as the beginning of the unwinding process for the continuous coverage mandates, which prevented states from conducting regular eligibility screenings for Medicaid recipients. Okay, so in other words, basically the translation of that is that in conservative states, they were trying to impose more and more austerity measures in order to justify kicking people off of Medicaid as we were in the middle of a massive economic panic. Millions of people were losing their jobs or getting, furloughed or all of these other different, tangential consequences with housing and unaffordability within the American economy. And all of these states were basically prevented from trying to kick people off immediately as that was all unfolding. Now they're basically opening the door for them to go ahead and do whatever the fuck they want. So they continue saying that residents of the 10 states that have refused life-saving Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, the ACA or Obamacare, are likely to be hit the hardest by the end of continuous coverage requirements, which the Biden administration estimates could result in 15 million people losing health insurance nationwide, including millions of children. Just a great functioning society that we have here, okay? And keep in mind, these millions of people, they're going to touch on this here in a second, it's not as if they did something wrong or they economically uplifted themselves to the point where they no longer would need Medicaid. Millions and millions of these 15 million would still be eligible for Medicaid. They're just being kicked off because they had some other, tangential consequence, like maybe they switched their address after getting kicked out of their house in the middle of the pandemic and they didn't get to go through all of the complex paperwork that was, forced on them in order to get back into this Medicaid program. So millions of these people are just being thrown off of their health insurance coverage, the limited health healthcare coverage that they have simply because of bureaucratic nonsense. I mean, it's just a completely insane way to run your healthcare system. But they got a quote here saying, because those states tend to make only the extremely poor eligible for Medicaid, they will have many people who make too much to qualify for the government health insurance, but not enough to reach the income needed to get federal subsidies to afford healthcare plans sold on the ACA marketplaces. The coverage the administration is counting on as the main fallback. Okay, so you have people who are falling in between this sort of weird gray zone middle ground in some of these conservative states where they're not poor enough to qualify for Medicaid, but they don't make enough in order to qualify for some of these ACA Obamacare programs. I mean, again, just a completely insane way to run a healthcare system. We need Medicare for all. We need universal healthcare at a fundamental level as a fundamental human right in this country, as they have in one way or another in essentially every other comparable OECD nation across the world. But they say that because of the administrative barriers associated with income verification and other eligibility tests, many people are likely to use Medicaid coverage even though they're still eligible for the program. They say that HHS, the Health and Human Services Department, has estimated that nearly 7 million people could be removed from Medicaid despite still being eligible due to, again, administrative churning, in other words, bureaucratic hurdles that are put intentionally in their way to make it basically impossible for them to get back onto this program. And they have a summary here saying that people who experience churning or coverage disruptions are more likely to delay care, receive less preventative care, refill prescriptions less often, and have more emergency department visits, which just by the way actually results in more cost to our healthcare system in the long run. So this isn't even something that, if you wanted to make a sort of economic argument, it's not even something that is saving us money. It is costing us more money in the long run, and what do you know, it's also happening to dump more money into the pockets of some of these healthcare mafia goons in our healthcare industry here in order to enrich them and their wealthy Wall Street shareholders. I wonder if there's some sort of a connection between, the money that these billion-dollar health insurance companies are making scamming the American people and the money that they are donating to our corrupt political class. I wonder if that is part of this, but they say that one study found that unstable Medicaid coverage increased emergency department use, office visits, and hospitalizations between 10% and 36%, and decreased the use of prescription medications by 19%. I mean, think about that. The wealthiest country in the history of the world, 19% increase in people who are forced to reduce their use of potentially life-saving medications because they can no longer afford it because of this needless austerity that is being imposed upon them. And they say compared to individuals consistent with Medicaid coverage, they say children with interruptions in coverage are also more likely to have delayed care, unmet medical needs, and unfilled prescriptions. And people are sitting back and wondering, why are we seeing a decline in life expectancy in the United States when other countries around the world, like within Western Europe, other comparable economies, are not seeing that same drop off in life expectancy? Could it be that we run our healthcare system with the top priority being the profit margins of these corporations instead of on actually delivering the best high quality care to the most amount of people that we possibly can? I wonder. Seems to be a mystery in the minds of our political class, but they have a reminder here in terms of some of the other pandemic era programs that have also been on the chopping block over the last couple of months. So they say that starting on March 1st, enhanced supplemental nutrition assistance programs, otherwise known as SNAP or food stamps, those benefits were cut off in dozens of states, slashing food aid for tens of millions of people. Okay, just great. We're slashing food aid programs, we're slashing healthcare aid programs, and they say, of course, additionally, the boosted child tax credit, the CTC, expired in late 2021 due to opposition from Senator Joe Manchin and congressional Republicans, resulting in a rapid surge in child poverty. And shortly before the expanded child tax credit lapsed, boosted unemployment benefits that helped millions weather economic chaos. And they say as the pandemic era safety net crumbles, congressional Republicans, because this doesn't seem to be enough for them, are also looking to roll back Medicaid, SNAP, and other key programs, even with further spending cuts and punitive work requirements. Okay, so this is how the U.S. government works. This is how the U.S. healthcare system works. This is how the U.S. economy works. We have an economy that is built up to the point where, you have the SVB collapse. We just got word that it was like a handful of people who were holding billions and billions and billions of dollars in incredibly risky ways in this one bank. Our government jumps at the opportunity in order to give them full, back coverage on some of these bailouts that we give them, dumping billions and billions of dollars in to save these Wall Street ghouls, these Silicon Valley ghouls. But then when it comes to starving children in the United States, poor communities in the United States, working class people across this country, then suddenly, we have to tighten our belts. We have to lift ourselves up by our bootstraps. We can't possibly be spending more on expanding this Medicaid coverage, on expanding the child tax credit, which was a demonstrable success. And then our government just turns around and says, oh, that was kind of cool. We slashed child poverty by 50%. Let's just stop doing that. Let's just go back to how it was before for absolutely no goddamn reason. But this is what it looks like when you have a political class that is entirely bought and controlled by corporate America, okay? That's who they serve. They do not serve average working class people, and this is a result. We have millions of people losing potential food benefits in the form of SNAP, millions of people that are going to be thrown off the small amount of healthcare that they actually get through some of these programs that are meant to protect the most vulnerable people within society, like Medicaid. We have the child tax credit expiring, and everybody within the upper echelons of both the Republican and the Democratic parties don't seem to give a shit.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying